Hello, everyone. My name is Eli Zuzovsky, and along with Carly Hoffman, I'm the new Assistant Director of JTS's MFA program in Creative Writing. We are joined tonight for this session, How to Write Maybe, with two brilliant writers, our MFA Director, Etgar Keret, and our MFA core faculty member, Rachel Kadish. We've just wrapped up our second residency here in New York, and they're going to talk about that and more broadly about writing. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Edgar and Rachel.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Yeah,
So
we've recently met in dramatic circumstances because
we made it through the snow. I made it back to Boston through the snow,
yeah,
and
it
everybody
was
was
it
there.
was it was an adventure. I mean because first of all, being Israeli, just seeing snow is exciting enough, but it is my first snowstorm, and having it during a residency, and also having almost all the students coming in person. We had a few had to Zoom, but but really, I would say 80% of them came. It was a real adventure, and especially when you giving a talk, about the historical fiction and showing rare books, it kind of made me feel like Indiana Jones.
That was very fun. And see, I didn't know it was your first snowstorm. If I had known that, we would have had to get everybody out for a snowball fight. But I loved the fact that one of the students had put chains on the tires of his car to drive down, and the librarian slept in the library, right, to be there for the morning session. So, yeah, and for me, when I don't know if you remember the first conversations that you and I had, and the conversations I had with Lisa about coming to teach in the program. One of the things that I felt really strongly about was, okay, we have to teach historical fiction, like have a devoted class to it at least once. It's a topic that most creative writing programs don't teach. And I'm a big fan of teaching it and kind of trying to create ways to teach it. But at JTS, where there's this enormous Jewish manuscript collection, we've got to do this. And it was so much fun because I got to talk to the students about the approaches I've kind of had to invent over time to figure out how I approach manuscripts, things I've seen other people do, how you look at a primary source, a letter from the 1700s, and you just notice everything you can about the language. So we worked on that some, which was fun. And then Morty from the library came in with actual 17th century manuscripts and things like that to just let them see what it actually looks like, to see the actual papers, the handwriting, and all the human information you can get from that. And the fun thing for me about that also is that you may have a certain percentage of the students in the room who think, yeah, I want to do historical fiction, but there are a lot of other students who suddenly start making connections to, well, I want to do surreal, futuristic, dystopian fiction. But either way, a lot of the skills are the same because you have to world build. You have to define a world for your reader who is not familiar with that world. So,
Well, so I must say that, that I spoke to the students after the workshop, and a few of them said to me, like, I could have never imagined enjoying writing historical fiction. But after doing this writing exercise that we had in class, where they wrote a text referring to a historical text, then
mm,
they said, well, actually, like, this is fun. But I
mhm.
want to say something in general about this kind of snowstorm. I think that, when you're a writer, you're always kind of pushing for metaphors and the allegories and stuff. And for me, I think that there is something about writing is that you want to communicate, and you and it's exciting, and and it's all about taking risks and being in a place that is away from your comfort zone. And I couldn't help thinking that with this snowstorm and people doing efforts and improvising. Some of our students are over 70 years old, but they still jumped to a car or jumped on the subway and came in. I think that it was almost kind of acting out the excitement of creative thinking, and I feel that when you see kind of grown ups acting this way, when you see the librarian, knowing that he won't be able to come Sunday morning, coming Saturday night, and sleeping on the floor, then it's very dramatic, but I'm saying that there is something there above it, that this kind of a community that is being formed, all about yearning, to do something that the world doesn't ask us to do. I thought when I was going the subway and it was pretty empty, that that they had this thing that you should travel only if it's essential, and all those students came because they thought it was essential, to come and to see the old books and to write an exercise. So it's moments like this that makes me feel that that maybe somebody is scripting this word, and that he has this kind of love for tear jerking mainstream, because it's kind of I might, if you remember in the first cohort, we also had an issue because some of the students got COVID, but they still wanted to study together. So we had to to find an open space to teach in. So it's like it's a recurring theme in our writing program life, that there are challenges, and that in a sense, like we don't play it safe. Nobody is risking their life, but everybody is willing to take some sacrifice, to take a little leap of faith, just to be able to be in that zone. And I think that that the things that makes sometimes people avoid writing is actually the fear of taking that leap. Because if I write a story, you can say your writing sucks, or I had a glimpse into your mind and it makes me want to puke. If you don't write a story, you don't experience that risk. And it's like kind of snow day writing a story. It was pretty much the same. And the students coming, they say, we're here for that. We're not afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. And I remember early on we were talking about when students come together for a writing residency, do you need some sort of like, bonding experiences, games that people play or something. So I think that life kind of gave everybody a couple cool things to improvise through together.
For
Sorry,
sure.
my dog is making some noise here. Um, so I know we had kind of thrown together some questions to talk about, and I'm happy to kind of jump into one of them, but I don't, is that
Right?
okay? I don't know if maybe we have time for that. I guess we're going to alternate between audience questions, but so one of the things that you and I talked about a little bit, because I think um, our writing styles or the writing products, what we produce are so different on the surface, right? I write these long, often historical, very involved novels, and then you have these beautiful pieces of magic that are brief and seem to come out of
Yeah.
nowhere.
Like, I mean, if there was like a high school of writers, you would be the best student in class, and I'd be smoking in the restroom.
Well, but the thing is, we talked a little bit about control versus improvisation, and I actually think we're maybe a little more similar in our processes than people would guess. I mean, how much when you start a piece of writing, how much do you know in advance about where it's going to go?
Well, I must say that I try to know as little as possible. Like sometimes when I have an idea for a story, I have to hold back, not to go with the story, like
Hmm.
to a definite place, because my fear as a writer, then let's say that if I write a story, and in my story, uh, I go in the rain, with a copy of historical book in Boston to give it to you, because I did something horrible. I stole one of your ideas, and this is the only way I can compensate for that. And then a mug comes to me and says to me, give me that book or I'll kill you, and I say to him, I'd rather die than give you that book, because I have to give it to Rachel to reach closure. Then basically, if I know that in the end of the story, I build a time machine and go to the past and you write a story about me, then when this guy would hold the pistol to me, it would be purely technical. I know there's no way
Yeah.
he'll shoot me. So to write for me such a scene, I have to allow myself this option that I'll be in danger, that I won't get out of it alive. And sometimes when I write stories, then this thing happens. I often tell my students, I say that a story is not a shovel, because a shovel, I don't know, you can dig a tunnel to wherever you want. I say a story is like a cowboy's horse. Then basically, you can want to go to the other side of the river, and the horse will kind of play along, but maybe sometimes back down or want to go to another way, or we want to stop and drink. And for me, this connection between a general place that you're heading to and this freedom of something in you to surprise you, I think that it's essential for certain kind of of writing. I often say that for me there are two kinds of stories. There are those kind of stories that when you read them, you feel like the writer is retelling an adventure, like I was once in a forest and I saw that. And there are those kind of stories where you feel that the writer is with you in the adventure, like you said, oh my God, there's lands, or kind of,
Yeah.
and I'm certainly aiming to be that second kind of writer. So I really need not to know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I'm actually very similar. I do want to say that please will you like write me a blurb for my book that says I would rather die than give up this book. That's every writer's
Yeah,
great book blurb, right? But
no, it's all recorded. You
it's
can,
all recorded. Okay,
yeah,
for
you can have
posterity.
a podcast.
But I mean, on the one hand, I am that like, okay, let me do my homework and get all the facts and I do the research, but I've never outlined anything. I don't want to outline. I don't want to know where it's going to go because if I do, then I'm going to start moving the characters like marionettes to get there. I want to be in the moment with the character going, "Oh my God, what would she do right now? This thing just happened. What would she do?" And let it go in a different direction than I planned. But because the novels are so long, this is why it takes me forever to write because I'm really improvising. I'm going, I have no idea what these three characters have to do with each other. I just feel like they should be in the same novel. And so let's see what happens. And then you just kind of go with it. My brother used to play jazz saxophone, and I had had all this good classical music training. So improvising really, I didn't know how a person did that. So I asked him once, and he said, "Well, you know what key you're in. You start playing something, you know the basic notes it should work, and if you hit a real honker, do it again. So they'll think you did it on purpose." And then start playing with it and seeing what you can make out of it. And years later, I realized, oh yeah, that's how I write. I can't do that with music, but that's how I write. It's all improvisation.
And the interesting thing is that because I think every writer kind of finds the territory and lives in it, and you mostly write historical fiction and I mostly write short stories. Then I I was wondering, like, as a writer, did you experiment with other genres, or did you perform rap songs before you got into
Yeah.
historical fiction?
Well, the thing is, I, I have this crazy line of really bizarro short stories that no one knows that I've written because they're like 2-page, 3-page stories. Some of them are set on other planets. There's one where uh, uh, there's a post office in the afterlife where after people have died, they can send letters back to the living. That was 2 pages long. That one was in the Iowa Review, but it's like no, it's so different from the stuff that people maybe know my writing for that I had to reread Anna Karenina for something a few years ago, and I noticed this one line that I'd never noticed the first time I read it, which was that in the end, when she's really losing it and she's kind of in a mental spiral, just shortly before she goes and lies down on the train track, right? She says that she's writing a children's book. It's one line in Anna Karenina, and I thought, what kind of children's story would Anna Karenina be writing? So I wrote a children's story that I thought Anna Karenina would maybe write. It's really cracked, but like at this moment. And you just saw like these tiny little things, but
And did it have a train in it?
there's a train that goes in the distance, but basically I made it like a Baba Yaga story, the Russian tales of this like, witch-like hideous woman figure. But I imagine at this moment, Anna Karenina has been made into like the whole community has made her into this hideous, monstrous person, and she's sort of on the edge of those images. So I played with Baba Yaga stories, but there is a train in the background at one point. So, but what about you? What are the things that you've done in your writing life that people don't know?
Well, I think I've tried and experimented with any form of writing that I had the chance,
Mhm.
to perform. I wrote the screenplays, I wrote plays, I wrote a musical, I wrote children books, I wrote graphic novels. I think my first paying job in writing was writing trailers for action films. Like Steven Seagal is the toughest cop in town, but when they shoot down his best friend, it's that kind of. So, so this was really like I wrote stories before that, but of course, like didn't get paid for it. And my first kind of paying writing gig was writing those things. And I think that there is something about uh, writing that sometimes there's something very Puritan about people saying like I would rather work in the coal mines than I don't know write a commercial. And I wrote many commercials. I wrote and I was a journalist, and I directed. But I think that anything that you do with words, it's kind of a proficiency that you can use in another way. And
Yeah.
it's a little bit this kind of like I won't get my hand dirty or I won't use my precious word for something. Then it's a waste. And I can actually like tell you that I have a story that is called The Story Victorious.
Huh.
That I won't read all of it. I'll just read the beginning, but it's really like it's written like a trailer, like a commercial. Now, I would have never thought about writing it, or I would have never known how to write it if I wouldn't have written those trailers. And it goes like this: this story is the best story in the book. More than that, this story is the best story in the world. And we weren't the ones to come to that conclusion. It was also reached by a unanimous team of dozens of unaffiliated experts who, employing strict laboratory standards, measured it against a representative sampling taken from world literature. This story is a unique Israeli innovation, and I bet you're asking yourselves, how is it that we, tiny Israel, composed it and not the Americans? What you should know is that the Americans are asking themselves the same thing. And more than a few of the big wigs in American publishing stand to lose their jobs because they didn't have the answer at the ready why it still mattered. So it's a longer story. But I'm saying it's like you do something and then you learn something and then you take something and then you use that. And I really, really feel that, that the kind of getting dirty, with anything that you do,
Yeah.
experimenting. Like I'm saying, many of our students, I encourage them, and they actually get points, for courage and for experimenting with genres and mediums that they never acted in before. So one of our writers worked with a stand-up comedian, Alex Edelman, as a mentor, learning how to write texts and perform them on stage. And one of our students who was a graphic novelist worked with me for a semester entirely on writing short stories. So this kind of idea is that you go outside of your comfort zone and you do things and you come back. It's something that I must say is very, very typical for short story writers and poets because I think that novelists like you are like, let's say, the agriculture people, the farmers that have this kind of, they come every day to the field and they work and they work and they know that in the end they have the fields to plow and stuff. And short story writers, they're hunters, gatherers. It's all about kind of honing your senses to the world around you. You
Mhm.
know, if you hear better, you can eavesdrop to somebody speaking in a cafe and hear something. If you know how to look, you can see this guy on the subway doing weird things. If you can uh, talk the talk, you have a dialogue with somebody you never met, and he'll tell you an expression that you're going to use in your story. So there is something really, really kind of like, it's like going in the forest and suddenly you see a fruit and you climb a tree and you take it. So this is the attitude. And I think that when you think like this, then basically as a hunter-gatherer, you want to have all your muscles trained. You want to be able to jump high. You want to be able, to lift heavy things. You want to be able to do all of that. And I really feel that, that it doesn't matter which kind of writing you do. I don't know if you do freestyling, on a stage, it's not going to harm you in any way. Maybe it will be bad, maybe it will be embarrassing. If you write a children book, like you're going to learn something from that. I felt, that when I started making film, and after I made my first film as a director, I felt that I suddenly, in the way that I wrote stories, they had the logic of a shot. Like I would give a description of a building, and then of the roof, and then of somebody standing on the roof. And basically, it kind of gave me another route or another way to do something that I could only get from going somewhere else, like leaving my comfort zone completely and finding that rare fruit.
Yeah. Oh, that's fit. I'm so glad you read that. It's just such a reminder of like how much playfulness also there is. People tend to think of writing as very serious. Um, and and everything is grist, everything. And I love that you used something from your other job. I was just thinking like I used to have a job working in radio drama. And radio drama as opposed to narrated stories. So in radio drama, you can't have a narrator say 2 weeks passed or it was the next day. So you have to signal it with sound effects. So you'll have, ambient sound of rain, footsteps on gravel, something like that, and the brain says, "Oh, we're in a different place." Or you put the actors in what they call a dead room, a room with no reverberations, and so you know you're not in an indoor place because you'd have reverberation. So you know you're outside, and you add a sound effect of birds chirping, and then you between the lack of reverb and the bird chirping, you know you're outside. So I had to learn those skills. And it changed also the way I make scene transitions. And I can depend less on narration telling us, it was Tuesday now. Um, yeah, I have more things I want to ask you, but are we should we have a break for questions from audience or
Uh,
So we have one question actually from Melissa about titles. Melissa is asking, at what point in your writing did you come up with the titles for your work? Did they come to mind easily, or were there different working titles throughout the process?
oh my goodness. Well, should I jump in, Edgar? Do you want
yeah,
to?
of course.
Okay. I'm terrible at titles. And in fact, I'm wrestling right now over title to my next book. But The Weight of Ink took me a very long time to write. And for most of that time, I had a different title, which everyone informed me that couldn't be the title because it would lead to the book being misshelved and all kinds of things. And they were right, but then I didn't know what we were going to call it, and everybody suggested titles, and I had a list at one point about like 40 titles, and it just nothing was. And in fact, we were late on the we had to delay the cover art for the book because we didn't have the title yet. And then my editor said, "What about the cost of ink? What about the price of ink?" And I was like, "Oh, we're getting close." And I don't remember whether she said it or I said it, but we finally settled on The Weight of Ink. But that was, I thought, the perfect title, but I had to write the whole thing and see what it was first and wrestle with it. So yeah, I always have a really hard time. Yeah, Edgar, what about you?
Yeah, I think that that I actually like finding a title, or sometimes I even can have the title before the story. But what I like about it, it gives me some kind of a navigation point. That there is a story and there is a title, and the story and the titles are not the same. I think that, let's say, for me, the perfect title is a title that you read it in one way before you read the story, and
Mm.
then forever when you look at it, it will look different. It's like I'm saying I can do that with any story. Like I'm not saying that my titles are very good, but I'm saying, let's say I have a story called Fly Already. So Fly Already, it's something that I think that every person can imagine, something like, I don't know, somebody yelling at the bird, or or I don't know, a plane being delayed. And in the story, it's basically a child seeing a man about to jump from a building, thinking that that man is a superhero, and he's impatient because the man is hesitating to jump, and he wants to see him fly because he thinks he's a hero. So he says, "Fly already." So I think that this is this kind of thing that the title should be in a position that it will a kind of compliment you for knowing something. It will say like, you know what this title is about. The person next to you doesn't know it, but we know. And I think that that many times when you find the title that has to have this kind of distance from the story, that it creates this kind of obscurity about it, then sometimes even if the story is not 100% right, if the title is right, it will be very easy to edit it to the right condition. And vice versa. I always feel that, that when I write a story that kind of feels in its place, kind of standing, it's almost like, when you do with tequila, I don't know how you call it in English, and you go when you hit the table, so you just kind of, you bang it and the title jumps out. It's really like, it's really, no, it's not something that you even have to think about. My mother had this expression, she would call it Fingerspitzen. It's something like in the end of your fingers that it's just kind of a feeling. And so I always feel that, the title is always my compass, always kind of helps me navigate the story.
Mm-hmm. That's okay. So I'm going to think about that. And when I work on title for this next novel, a title that when you've read it will mean something different. One of the questions we had talked about is this question of can writing be taught? So now I'm going to ask you, as director of an MFA program, can writing be taught? How do you feel about that?
So the first thing I said to the students when we came, that I said, I've taught in the past in the creative writing program that basically kind of treated it as a NBA basketball training camp. Like you come, we teach you the moves, you're going to dunk, and I never never felt truthful, and I said that the way that I see writing program is more like kind of an AA meeting, or Weight Watcher meeting. It's kind of saying, listen, we're people that have different interests, from the rest of humanity, and we're doing stuff that that our wives or husbands saying, why are you doing that? This guy doesn't exist. Why do you say that he swims in the river if he doesn't exist? Let's do something else. This is weird, and all of us have to deal with that. And still, like, we'll come in a snowstorm to sit together, to have better skill, to be able to do that thing that nobody in the world wants, or very few people in the world want, so I'm saying that first, it is a support group in the best manner. It's people that see the world in the same way, that give value to the same thing. And the second, I think, and at least in our program, it's really not aligning the students and saying, you're going to do this and this, and you're going to wear this kind of golf shirt and smoke a pipe and shut up, eat your fruit, drink your wine. It's really like, it's not this way. And I think that, that always when I speak with students, it's basically saying, let's talk so I'll help you understand better what you want, and let's see how I can help you with what you want. And it's all this kind of idea. I always see it as a metaphor that, let's say, every person's writing is a planet, and he was born on that planet. And all those people in creative writing workshop, like us, we come with a spaceship and we land on that person's planet, and we say to him, hello, sir, or hello, ma'am. Now we'll give you a guided tour to your planet, and we'll explain to you what this planet is all about. There's something ridiculous, in this kind of story. But if I come to a planet I've never been before, I could ask, the person who knows it much better, what's that smoke over the hill, or is that a river? So why don't you build your house next to the river? So I could say all those stuff. It wouldn't come from a place of superiority or kind of like 75 and I know 83. It just comes from a place that maybe the fact that I wasn't born in this place also gives me some kind of an advantage. But for sure, you know, every writer is the boss. And every writer wants some place to outsource this responsibility to somebody else. He wants to have a professor that will say to him, this is wrong and this is right, write more metaphors because it kind of soothes you. But this will never get you to become a better writer. Because in the end, it's like to write well, you have to go in very deep, and to go in to those places, nobody can teach you how to reach them. Somebody can support you while you do it, but not more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I also think of a sports metaphor, but not in terms of teaching, but in terms of coaching. Like I don't think writing can necessarily be taught, but I think of it can be coached. You're the athlete, you, the writer, or the athlete, you have to do the work. So if I'm the coach standing there, maybe I can help you save some time or do what you're doing a little bit better. Maybe I can say, hey, I'm watching you and I'm seeing you're doing this. How about you try something else? But the writer has to be the one to run the laps or do the work. And then if it doesn't work with that person, it doesn't work with that person. But I think, like most kinds of art, the end product looks effortless. You listen to a piano concerto, you watch the Olympic skaters, you read a novel, and it just looks all seamless. So I see my job is partly to say, okay, what goes into this? Did you notice how he used these verbs? Did you notice how, she used these lines? And and that those are the things I try to kind of get into with the students. And I feel like, first of all, they can learn so much from hearing each other's critiques. Because when it's your own work being critiqued, we all have our ego on the line. And at least for me, there's always a little bit of panic, like, oh my God, what did they say? And it's hard to even take things in. But when it's someone else's work being discussed, it's easier sometimes to learn. And I always try to say to them, remember, you're not critiquing the story to say what you would have written. You're trying to look at what they're aiming for and help them do that more and better. Um, so yeah, I think and I learned so much from teaching too. But I never think of it as teaching like I am now handing somebody. It's more like here's some tools you might want to try using them, and if not, you know, do something different.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you have a particular writing teacher who was like a really wonderful teacher?
Uh, my parents,
Mm,
uh, they were both Holocaust survivors, and my mother lost her entire family. She lost her parents, she lost her brother, and my father lost his sister, and very close after the war also his parents. And I think that there was this thing with them being children of war. My father spent almost 2 years in a hole in the ground in which he could not stand or lie down, just sit, and with contracted muscles and everything. And my mother had to live her life, with nobody watching her, with both her parents dead, in a very early age. So this is kind of created this huge world of imagination in their head, and I think that they really like that in our lives, we always have a parent or an adult that we look up to, and so we have this kind of world of imagination. But when somebody out there says, "Hey, stop doing that," we know that he wants what's good for us. But for somebody like my mother, who grew up in an orphanage where the other people were trying to steal her food or to exploit her, then basically the outside world had no standing. whatever you made up and you were able to hold to, whatever story or word you created, if you could cling to it, then it was yours and you won't let go. So I think it was the importance of imagination and storytelling and word building. I would say the essential survival skill was always in the house. In House of Survivors, there's always this thought about how, like every kid thinks, if I would be in the Holocaust, would I survive? And for me, it was apparent from very young age that without imagination and without the ability to be active, to create things, to make my own word, I wouldn't have a chance to survive. I didn't think physically, but I couldn't keep that thing that was me. It was a kind of a way that that no matter what they do to you, there will be a place that nobody can take from you.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I was when I asked, I was thinking of, writing teachers, but when you say that and answer it that way, it's yeah, I think we all have well, first of all, it reminded me, I grew up, it was my grandparents who survived the Holocaust. My mother was born on the run. But this sense of the stories and then the holes in the stories, the things that are not told. And when I was younger, I thought I was hearing the whole stories. And then only as I got older did I realize all of the gaps. And then it starts to look like a photographic negative where the shadows are bright white. You see everything's reversed and you see all the absences start to shine. This one part in a story my grandfather would tell about when they were on the run and they were in a Russian prison, and then where he stopped and didn't tell the next part. And to me later, it was so glaringly obvious what he wasn't saying. So that kind of thing. And I also had my grandfather would say to me, you have to remember these stories because one day we'll be gone and someone needs to know these stories. And I think like, most of us who were raised among survivors really took that to heart. And at the same time, I remember thinking when I was younger that what I wanted to do when I grew up was kind of go from place to place and tell people stories about each other. So then in my child's imagination, then they wouldn't hate each other anymore. That if they just knew the stories. And I think on some level, despite all the adult things I know, on some level, I probably still believe that, like, if people could just really hear each other's stories, that would somehow do it, you know.
Yeah,
So,
and it's funny, but when you think about the kind of stories that you're looking for and the way that you tell the story, the same way that you talked about those gaps, then let's say with my mother, she was a child throughout the Second World War. So everything that every story that she would tell, it would be like one day I was sitting in a room in the ghetto, and a tall man with boots entered and shouted something in German. And I would say to her, "Mother, when was that? What year?" And she said, "Does it matter?" And they say, "What ghetto was it?" And she said, "Does it matter?" And essentially kind of remembering it as a child, we usually kind of go and we say a date, a place, a time, a situation, and we kind of zoom in. But children, they don't have this context. So
yeah.
when she would tell the story, then they would never have details in them. Now, in most of my stories, characters don't have name and they
Mm.
don't take place in a certain time. And many times, you don't know which city or village they're in. And it's for me, it was kind of being taught from my mother that she had in her stories that were perfect stories was what you need to have in a story. So it's almost kind of, you could say, like despising details. It's really, I tell you something crazy. My mother and my father are the people I love the most in my life. I don't know the death dates. I don't remember the death dates. I can't even tell you the name of the cemetery is a burden. I go there, but the taxi driver takes me, my brother takes me, but in my mind, it's kind of it, I'm almost forced to be excused of these details, you know, because uh, because my mother would tell me stories about her parents or even her grandparents, and she would never name them.
Oh,
So for me, it's like a good story is a story in which you don't remember the name, and in a good story, a good son doesn't remember his parents' death date. And it's kind of I'm saying that storytelling breeds kind of a word view and a different kind of storytelling. And I'm saying when you hear the gaps, you say it's all about the gaps. When I hear this kind of obscurity, I say it's all about this obscurity. And we're basically echoing, stories we love, told by people we love,
yeah.
because that's how it goes.
That's so interesting. I feel like it circles back in a way to the fact that we both are very improvisational and I certainly see my process as chaotic, but we create very different kinds of forms. And it's very moving to me that you're talking about the way your mother would tell stories. So my mother was a baby and on the run, but the storyteller in my family was my grandfather, who was in his 40s during the war and was very educated in particular about things, and it was the details mattered, right? So, and I used to just, when I was a kid, you would ask a question or say something about current events, and his response would be, well, to understand that, first you need to know that in 1486, and you just knew it was going to be an hour. And, the history lesson, and I just, you wanted to just slide under the table and escape. And now I'm just laughing because now as an adult when I'm trying to tell him a story I'm like, well, okay, but first you need to know that in 1486 so anyway, I think they put their stamps on our ways of telling
Yeah,
stories.
and it's funny because in the Jewish tradition we say "Veigata lebincha,"
Mm.
and I don't know, and you told your son,
Tell your children, yeah.
yeah, tell your children. So I'm saying this kind of idea of kind of telling your children is, I think, if you simplifically look at it, then it's basically you keep a story. The story is this kind of block, and you
Mm,
pass this block from generation. But
mm,
what you keep when you keep a story is you keep the story and the ways that it's being told.
mhm,
And in a sense, weirdly so that the same way that we carry the DNA through generation,
mm,
we carry those kind of different traditions that and evolutions that that each of us was in a sense also born or come from a tradition or a lineage of a certain kind of stories. It doesn't matter, like he or she could be much lesser in talent, but for sure it's like, I mean, if they do a Photoshop of my stories or my fiction and Kafka's and my stories or fiction and Proust, then my fiction will look a little bit closer genetically to Kafka.
mhm,
So I really find it sometimes interesting, kind of finding this resemblances among writers, that you look at them and you say, he's this one's evil twin brother, he's not so bright nephew, it's really
Uh,
like, and that together it creates those kind of clusters, of writing.
yeah. It's funny because I don't remember, but it might be the same passage of the V'higat Talbincha from the Passover Seder. You'll pass it along to your children, and then there's the line Harei ze meshubach, which is therefore it's to be praised if you pass along the story. But I used to just in my head sometimes think instead of Harei ze meshubach is Harei ze mesubach. Therefore it's complicated.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed, these little short stories I write that are set on other planets or whatever, they don't have Jews in them. The minute I have Jews in a story, Hareza Misubach, it just gets complicated and there's history and there's all this stuff. But every now and then I write something, set on another planet and I have a lot of fun with that. So
Yeah, but at some stage, there will be Jews on that other planet.
Jews on that other planet,
You
right?
will go to a deli on that planet, and the guy will speak Yiddish to you.
All right, so that sounds like a challenge, and at some point I'm going to have to try that. So I'll run the experiment.
Jewless planet, you can call it the Jewless planet.
I'll let you know how it goes. I'm totally happy to just keep talking, but do we have questions? Do we have more? I don't want to be ignoring the everybody in the
Yeah.
room.
So we actually have some questions on your practical approach to writing. We've got some questions on outlines, which I think you've covered a little bit, and then also deadlines and routines. Do you have any writing routines that you use?
Huh. Do you want to do that one first, Edgar?
No. You should.
Yeah. D Deadlines are really helpful, especially if they're with somebody you're a little intimidated by. You can't have a deadline with your best friend where you say, "Yeah, I'll give you this manuscript next week," because they're going to forgive you if you don't have it ready. So it's good to set a deadline where you feel like, no, I'm going to feel a little embarrassed if I don't have this thing ready. Because otherwise I would never finish anything if I didn't have that finish line to cross over. But as far as writing routines go, um, I mean, in an ideal world, sure, the times when sometimes I can go to an arts colony and just work constantly, but really, real life tends to be kind of chaotic. And I remember those years, especially when my kids were little, when there were so many writing days where you start writing and then there's a snowstorm and school is closed, or someone has an ear infection, or, somebody throws up. There was a lot of vomit, right? So all those years, and I remember, reading that line in John Gardner, which I read in grad school, a novel should be a vivid and continuous dream. And I thought, how am I going to do this? I can't have a vivid and continuous dream. Like I just had to, go pick up the kids from school, and that's wonderful. But there goes the writing day, and I might not be able to get back to it for 3 days, and I won't remember what I was doing and all of that. And there was one day I remember I was just like hauling around running these errands, and I thought, how am I supposed to do this? And suddenly the light bulb went off, and I thought, oh, the novel is a vivid and continuous dream for the reader. The reader gets to have a vivid and continuous dream. My life is full of interruptions, full of, oh my God, what was that character saying? I got to go reread the whole book because I don't remember what I was writing. Um, and and that's okay because I put it together piece by piece and then I edit it to try to take out the skid marks from the times when I got pulled away and distracted. And in the weight of ink, there's a staircase that's important. It needs to be described twice from two different characters' points of view. I had 4 descriptions of the staircase in the draft of that novel. My editor very gently pointed it out because I had gotten pulled away from the book so many times, I'd forgotten. And I thought, oh, yeah, I have to describe the staircase. So I went and edited them out. So in the end, it looks kind of seamless, right? It's just the number that should be. But my writing process was not a vivid and continuous dream. So it was, and I know Tova Mervis, who also teaches in the program, we used to joke about, she lives near me, and about how we would be using every moment we could to write. You're sitting in the car in the school pickup line, everybody's sitting there with their engines off, waiting for and both of us are just sitting there, editing in the car, waiting for the signal to move, and just taking any moment you can. So no routine, but you make it work anyway, right?
Yeah, so it's funny. I think for me, it's as if in a strange way, I have to choose it every day. That it's kind of like when I write a scene and I don't know if I'll get shot on my way to your doorstep. So I'm saying in that same sense, I have to wake up with this feeling saying, maybe I stop writing. Maybe I don't need this thing. Maybe I'll do something that's more fun. And it's kind of like it's strange because I tried to think of days in which I actually don't write, and in a sense, every day, I kind of say, "Oh, I don't have to write," but I find myself doing it because I'm bored or because I have an idea, and I thought about it, and the 2 residencies, the last one and this one, are basically the only continuous period of time that I can remember in which I didn't write at all. And the fact that I didn't write actually kind of makes me happy in a sense, because I think that the fact that I almost write every day is that I have this kind of discontent. There is something that is missing, something that I yearn for, something that isn't there. And as weird as it is, in those days when we hang out and we do writing exercises and we do all those things, I simply feel okay not to write.
Thank you. We have a question from Moshe on authenticity in your voice. Moshe is asking, when writing, how do you know if what ends up on the page is truly you, or if you're trying to sound like someone else?
Interesting. Meaning, like if so at first when you were reading the question, I thought, oh, but I'm trying to be in the voice and mindset of so many other characters. But I guess the question is like if you're how do you know when you're just imitating another writer? Do you think that's
Not
Or I
really,
suppose what authenticity means to you as a writer. Is that something you're thinking about at all?
for sure. And for me, really, I think that this is the first and most essential thing. I think that uh, uh, as a person, I really want people to like me. I want people to admire me. I want people to think that I'm smart and handsome. And I put a lot of effort into those things. But when I am writing, I'm excused from that. When I'm writing, I can just be me. And that's probably the only place in the world that I don't have this kind of feeling that I'm also acting out. Maybe I'm doing what I'm doing, but I also know that I'm being perceived doing what I'm doing. And I like people to think that I'm nice, so I do nice things. Also because I'm nice, but also because I like people to think that I'm nice. But writing should be this kind of a confession booth, this place where you say, I don't care. It's fiction. It's not me. It's the guy in the store. It's some other person. So if you don't take that advantage, of writing, then why they are doing it in the first place? I mean, if you just want to be a bit fake, and to kind of snap somebody or to look a bit smarter than you are, go out in life and do that. It will be more, will have kind of a more direct effect. The only reason I see to get into this realm is to say, hey, here you can say the truth, here it's okay. And I think that whenever I write, the moment that I feel that I'm kind of trying to be smart, trying to be wisest, trying to impress. And it happens that, it's like you make a U-turn and you try to make it happen again. And some stories you can't, they're lost because there's something unauthentic in the voice. You want to sound a little bit more moral than you are, or a little bit wiser than you really are. And sometimes it can taint the story arc. And I say, okay, I don't know. I don't know how to do it.
it's interesting. It's so and you said the person who asked the question is named Moshe.
Yeah.
So if I'm misunderstanding the question, then maybe he'll write back in and say, no, what I meant is this. But I mean I'm always trying to ventriloquize to be different characters. But if the question is more about like finding your own writing voice, it's not something I think about a ton, but I think sometimes you work a sentence and work a sentence and finally it comes into a form where it just rings in you like a bell. And that feels right. And then I never question whether am I influenced by Toni Morrison? Am I influenced by Milan Kundera in that sentence? Anything that you've read and loved is in you, right? Mark Twain, if you read and love Mark Twain, that's in you, and you're all those things together. Obviously, you don't want to plagiarize, but usually I try to. I mean, there's so many different ways to say the same thing. Um, there's some voices are more controlling, some are more hands off. So I'm here in Boston, right? So one of the famous, right? Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, right? That listen, my children is a certain kind of sit down, I'm going to tell you a story. And you could characterize it as a folksy, but also a controlling way of saying it. And you can say the same thing by saying, it was midnight, it was silent. there was a ringing of hoofs on cobblestone. So that's maybe the more Ernest Hemingway to say it, right? And there's, there's a million different ways, Paul got up on the horse. There's a million ways to approach it, and some are more characteristics of other writers. And I tend to just be thinking like, what is this character doing? What does the character need? And I try to get myself out of the way. Um, when I try to not be so controlling in a line. I try one of my favorite musical experiences when I used to play in orchestras was I got to be in the pit orchestra for an opera and I could play my heart out and nobody would look at me. They were all paying attention to the characters and the story on stage and I was just providing the music. And I think of writing that way sometimes and just trying to I'm only paying attention to what the characters need and what the story needs and I'm not thinking about, what is my voice. I'm just, yeah. So I hope that answers the question somewhat. I'm not sure that does.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we have to wrap up. But I just want to thank you both, Rachel and Edgar, and everyone on this call. This was such a lovely session. And I want to remind everyone that we have another event, not this coming Monday, but the one after, the 9th, with some of our students. They'll talk about their experience of the program, and it's also at 7 p.m. And then, of course, our application deadlines are coming up on March 1st. So please, all the information is available online. You can find it on our website that is on the chat now. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. This
Thank
was
you.
really fun.
Yeah.